we're reflecting then really on the debate around voluntary assisted dying. You brought a motion to Tynwald which stated that Tynwald is of the opinion that legislation to allow for voluntary assisted dying should be introduced. What ensued was I think near 5-hour discussion, which involved most of Parliament at some point, actually, yep. Which is unusual in its own right. Several members questioned your timing in bringing this motion to the court. Your response in your closing comments was, to paraphrase, there's never a good time to discuss these sorts of things. But why specifically now did you feel was the right time?
Yes, that was asked, and I think one of the answers to that is that I wanted this Tynwald, in some ways, to have the experience, to have the maturity to be able to argue these sort of issues and debate them and bring out the nuances of it. There is never a particularly good time to talk about important matters like assisted dying. The first proper debate was 2003. It's been an ongoing debate since then. But last year we were very much consumed, as the UK was, with talking about Brexit and a whole range of other issues. Also climate change, and obviously that was a very big part of this Tynwald.
And this one was emotive in quite a personal way, which perhaps some of those issues were maybe less personal.
Exactly, and one of the really good things that's come out of this Tynwald is I think people have the ability to share their life experiences quite openly in ways that perhaps previously they wouldn't have been able to. So, as you said, quite a few of most of the members spoke, and some of them gave really personal experiences of looking after somebody who was in terminal illness or who died in front of them. And those sort of personal experiences can only enrich debate and add to it. So, there's never a good time. I certainly didn't want to start this debate just before Christmas or something like that. But looking at the legislative timetable, if we are going to go forward in this administration, doing it now gives us some time to debate it further and then talk about any legislation that would be needed.
Speaking of the legislative timeline, there were a few concerns about this being debated in relation to the capacity bill and how those two are kind of intertwined.
Yeah.
Any feelings on that?
Yeah, and I think that there were some very good comments looking at the capacity of a small parliament and a focused government. At the start of this administration, Howard Quayle got all the members together, did a very ambitious programme for government, and that has got to deliver. On top of that, we've got transformation of the health service, which involves quite a lot of legislative changes. On top of that, we've got Brexit, and on top of that, we've got climate change and producing both an action plan and a report, which was fabulously done, but now a climate change bill that's going to be coming forward. So there's a huge amount of work there, and part of the question was, have we got the capacity, have we got the number of legal drafters to deal with that? On top of that, the Department of Health and Social Care is a little bit behind in terms of bringing in updated legislation, looking both at the Mental Health Act, but also looking at the Mental Capacity Act, which was passed in the UK over a decade ago, which deals with how you assess somebody's capacity, things like living wills, enduring power of attorney, a whole range of other things. And there were some concerns from members that without that backdrop, that making decisions about assisted dying might be very difficult.
You've mentioned the first time this was kind of brought to Tynwald, which was in 2003 to 2005, roughly, I think, and then there was a debate with parallels in 2015. I word that carefully. What was different about what you were proposing?
Yeah. The wording of the motion was misinterpreted by some people as trying to steamroller legislation through, which it wasn't, and it can't do through Tynwald Court. But what it was trying to do was to see whether attitudes had changed since the last debate, with a new court, with a new administration, what we felt about it. And I think it did show genuinely a change in opinion, as there has been a change in public opinion.
Is it a less conservative administration, perhaps?
I think I wouldn't use sort of words like conservative or socialist or liberal. I constantly try to stop myself because the politics on the Isle of Man
with a small c.
With a small c, yes. I think certainly it's far more consensual. It's far more people working together for a common aim. And far less of the personal antagonisms that perhaps we saw previously. I think also that there is far more of a progressive nature, whether you call that liberal or conservative with a little c, but the ability to deal with things like equality, like poverty, like homelessness, like the living wage, minimum wage, and deal with these in a very inclusive way. And I think it's that gave me the confidence to actually bring forward a motion like this and get that discussion going. And also the reason why we had a really in-depth, very intellectual, but very civilised 5-hour debate on it. Nobody started shouting at each other. Nobody rubbished each other's arguments or opinions. Everyone actually took on board what other people were saying and tried to then deal with that and try to plan forward for what they believed would be the best thing for the Isle of Man.
The consensus among lots of Tynwald members seemed to be, whatever their views on the kind of principles behind the motion, maybe it was sort of too much too soon.
Yeah.
Specifically, if I think back to Bill Shimmons's comments, he spoke about some constituents' concerns over it being maybe the thin end of the wedge and not really knowing kind of where it would lead. Mr. Robertshaw was a bit more direct in his words. Do you understand those concerns?
I do. I not just understand it. I completely respect them. There are people who have a very firm viewpoints that they've developed over many years. For whatever reason and in any direction.
In both sides.
On both sides. And I respect that. And I think you have to, because there are different opinions in society. There are different opinions on if you go up and down Strand Street. And what Tynwald has to do is reflect those different opinions. But you've also got other people like Jason Morehouse who had changed his view on the back of the motion, on the back of talking to other people.
And said so, didn't he?
Yeah, and it was quite, and I respect him for his honesty about that. And that's what the motion was about. It was trying to, I suppose, get people to not to take a side, but get people to think about the issues involved, get people to start thinking about the complexity of them as well. Because it's not just a pro and con debate, it's not just a binary debate. We talked a lot about other countries and what they do, not in terms of a model for the Isle of Man, but to show the spectrum of change that's happened around the world in response to public opinion. And what certainly Bill Shimmons was talking about was to try to get a better idea of public opinion on the Isle of Man, but to make sure that opinion was also informed. Not meaning to be patronising to people, but when you talk about assisted dying, some of the technicalities, the details of it, you have to get right. And if you go into it or be seen rushing into it, people can feel a little bit misinformed, and perhaps that they're being, as you said, steamrolled into agreeing to something that actually they want a bit more time to think about. And so we talked about some of the practicalities of how other countries work, but also the details about what happens on the Isle of Man here as well.
The Lord Bishop's contributions were useful in lots of ways on this topic, but especially to differentiate between voluntary assisted dying and euthanasia. Yeah. Several different discussions which get conflated, if you like. You said, or indicated perhaps, that your plan was, maybe still is, to look at introducing a private member's bill on this if you felt that opinion both in Tynwald and in the public was of that leaning, perhaps. Mm-hmm. Is that still the intention, or is that off the cards now because of how the debate went?
I mean, it was a very interesting debate, and I think the feeling from many members was that they wanted a bit more information, a bit more details. They wanted to actually think how it would work practically on the Isle of Man. I'm one of a member of backbenchers who are interested in pursuing this subject because of our own personal experiences and the experiences that have been relayed to us from constituents and conversations we've had in the community. So what we need to do now is let the dust settle on this, sit down and think, what is the best way of taking this forward? Is that to bring a private member's bill this year and bring that through and have a full public consultation over the summer and then try to push on with legislation before the end of this Tynwald? Or is it to actually try to create more of an informed debate to get more information out there for people and perhaps make it an election issue next year? And I haven't made my own mind up about that. What I am sure about, though, is that anything that we do has to be balanced, has to be brought through very carefully, so that we try not to leave people behind. One of the things I didn't want the debate in Tynwald to be was divisive, and I don't think it was. I think at the end of the day, people felt that they'd stated their position and that had been listened to, and we need to do exactly the same with the community.
I think it was Jane Poole Wilson who spoke about it not being a polarised debate. It's not a black or white, yes or no, is it, by any stretch? Keeping with that model of the private members' bill, which is, from the outside, it looks like there are some parallels with the way that abortion reform came through. Do you think this will garner the same sort of public interest?
That's a very good question, because what I think Jane Poole Wilson expressed was that sometimes it's only when you're confronted with the dying or the death of a loved one and you witness it yourself, it makes you think about these issues yourself.
And a lot of members hadn't they?
Exactly.
Not all, but...
Exactly. And it is a very, very personal thing. What you might want at the time of your life if you are facing an imminent and inevitable death. And the numbers involved on the Isle of Man would be relatively small. We know that there are just over 200 deaths each year due to cancer, probably a few more due to degenerative neurological diseases. When you look at other jurisdictions that have brought it in assisted dying, probably only about 1% of people who die there use it. So we're talking about small numbers of people and a very, very personal decision. So I think in some ways the arguments are far more complex than abortion. But in other ways, they are about autonomy and choice, and the law not stopping somebody who has the capacity to make their own decision doing the best thing for themselves.
Just finally, your motion, at least in its original form, didn't gain the support of the House on this of Parliament on this occasion. But as you said in your closing comments, you did spark a widespread debate. So, is that second prize, if you like?
With the way that you can bring motions to Tynwald at the moment, they have to have a direction and a vote at the end of them. And if you want a more generalised debate, there sometimes aren't a lot of forums for doing that, apart from things on Manx Radio and some of your opinions. So when I went, to be honest with you, I didn't expect Tynwald to say yes, we want legislation brought in, because some people were concerned that would put the onus on the government to have to draft that legislation. And I think that there are issues with capacity at the moment. There are lots of things that need to be done, and I didn't want to burden the drafters with that. But I think what the motion did was trigger a debate to get people to talk about this, but also on the back of that to get people to really state how they feel the Isle of Man should move forward, and particularly the support of the palliative care service here and the role of Hospice Isle of Man on the island and the amazing work they do, which sometimes, again, you don't know until you need it, but it is there and it does fantastic work on the island. And so I think what really came out of the debate was an acknowledgement of that and an appreciation of what happens for people who are terminally ill on our island.